Alex Van Halen sat quietly backstage. He wasn't on the bill. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But when he heard Black Sabbath was playing their final show in Birmingham, the city where it all began, he couldn't stay away. For most fans, this was just a farewell concert. But for Alex Van Halen, it felt personal. Deep inside, something was pulling him to that moment. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was something else entirely. As Ozzy Osbourne's voice roared across the packed arena, Alex felt chills. The same chills he felt when he was just a teenager, listening to Sabbath's first album in his parents' basement. Back then, he and Eddie were just kids. Dreaming, practicing, fighting, creating. And through it all, Sabbath was the soundtrack to their beginning. Now, watching Tony Iommi riff through War Pigs one last time, Alex couldn't help but whisper, "This is where it all started." He wasn't talking about Black Sabbath. He was talking about rock and roll as he knew it. For him, for Van Halen, for every band that picked up a guitar after 1970, Sabbath wasn't just a band. They were the blueprint. But there was something else bothering him. Something he didn't expect. Alex wasn't just here to honor Sabbath. He was here to face a ghost. Because deep in the crowd's roaring applause, he could hear Eddie. Eddie and Sabbath, the bond fans never saw. Most people never knew how deep Eddie Van Halen's connection to Black Sabbath truly ran. Sure, they opened for each other back in the late 70s. Sure, they shared wild nights, strange hotel stories, and blistering stages. But that wasn't the whole picture. What fans didn't see was Eddie sneaking into Black Sabbath rehearsals just to watch Tony Iommi's fingers move. What they didn't hear were the quiet, respectful phone calls between two guitar gods, Tony and Eddie, talking not about gear, but about fear, about fame, about pain. When Van Halen first started, Eddie often said, "I'm not trying to be better than Iommi. I'm just trying to understand how he does it." And Alex always remembered that. So when Eddie passed away, it hit Tony hard. Harder than he let on. And now, watching Sabbath's final bow, Alex realized something. This wasn't just Sabbath's last concert. This was a goodbye from one era to another. And a silent tribute from one legend to another. Backstage, Alex clutched a small object in his pocket. A guitar pick. Eddie's last one. He'd brought it for a reason. Not for show. Not for attention. But because tonight, he wasn't just a drummer. He was a brother honoring two icons, both still alive in the music. As the final notes of Paranoid rang out, the crowd went wild. Fireworks exploded. Ozzy raised his arms. Tony smiled. And for a brief moment, Alex closed his eyes. He could hear Eddie laughing. But this wasn't the end. Because something happened after the show that changed everything. The backstage moment no one saw coming. After the final bow, most fans went home thinking they'd seen the end of something historic. But behind the curtain, history was still being written. Alex stood backstage as crew members packed up gear. He was about to leave quietly, unnoticed, until someone called his name. It was Tony Iommi. "Alex," he said, walking over with a tired smile. "I was hoping you'd come." Alex was caught off guard. He didn't think Tony even knew he was there. But the look in Tony's eyes said everything. This wasn't about music anymore. The two men embraced. No words. Just a moment shared by survivors of a life few understand. Legends who'd seen their brothers fall, who'd felt the fire of fame and the coldness of loss. Then Tony said something that shook Alex. "I still remember the first time I saw Eddie play. I thought, this guy's going to change the world." Alex nodded, his voice breaking slightly. He did. Tony reached into his jacket and pulled out something unexpected, a photo. A black and white shot from 1978. Sabbath and Van Halen. Young. Loud. Unstoppable. "I kept this," Tony said. "Because I knew one day, this would matter." They stood in silence for a while. Then Tony added, "You know, I thought this concert would feel like an ending. But maybe, it's not. Maybe it's just the torch passing again." Alex didn't speak. He just took Eddie's pick from his pocket, placed it on the table beside the old photo, and whispered, "Back to the beginning." But there was one more twist in this night. Because someone else was watching. Ozzy's final whisper, and a new chapter begins. Ozzy had been quiet most of the night. After the concert, he went straight to his dressing room, away from the chaos. He was tired. His body ached. But his mind was racing. He had felt something different on stage. Not just the end of Sabbath, but a weight lifting. Like he'd finally said what he needed to say with music. Now, there was only peace. But then he heard a knock on the door. It was Alex. The two hadn't spoken much over the years. Different bands. Different lives. But tonight, they were just two men who had given everything to rock and lost pieces of themselves in return. Alex sat down across from Ozzy. No cameras. No handlers. Just two warriors talking in the quiet. I brought Eddie with me tonight, Alex said, holding up the pick. Ozzy's eyes glistened. You always did it for the right reasons, Alex, Ozzy said. You and Eddie, you played like it still mattered. Like it wasn't just noise. Then Ozzy leaned forward, voice low. Don't let it die. Alex blinked. What? Don't let the fire go out, Ozzy whispered. This music, it's not finished. Not while people still feel it. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. And suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't the end of Sabbath. It was the beginning of something new. The letter Eddie never sent. Alex couldn't sleep that night. Back in his hotel room, the echoes of Ozzy's words rang louder than the concert itself. Don't let it die. He looked out over Birmingham's quiet skyline, the city that gave birth to heavy metal. The same city that now whispered one final goodbye. But Alex knew something had changed. Ozzy's plea wasn't just sentimental, it was a challenge. A torch passed with trembling hands. Alex reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, worn envelope. He'd carried it for years. Folded neatly. No address. No stamp. Just one word on the front, scribbled in Eddie's handwriting. Tony. Eddie had written it before he got too sick to tour again. He never got around to giving it to Tony Iommi. He told Alex once, one day, when it feels right, you'll know. Alex stared at the letter for a long time. He had read it once. Only once. And that was enough to burn it into his memory. Inside, Eddie had thanked Tony, not for the riffs, not for the tours, not for the fame, but for inspiring him to be fearless. He wrote, "You gave permission to weird kids like me to be loud, to play with pain, to scream in six strings." And in the last line, Eddie wrote something that Alex never forgot. "If you guys ever play one last show, know I'll be there, even if you don't see me." Alex felt a lump in his throat. He folded the letter again and put it back into his bag. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe the fire Ozzy was talking about didn't have to fade. Maybe there was a way forward. But the next day, Alex would receive a call that would change everything. The call that shook Van Halen's legacy. The phone rang at 9:13 a.m. Alex thought it was the hotel. It wasn't. On the other end was Sharon Osbourne. "Alex," she said quickly, "Ozzy wants to see you again." Alex was surprised. They had just spoken hours earlier. "Is everything okay?" Sharon paused. "He has an idea. And you need to hear it." Minutes later, Alex was back at the Osbournes' hotel suite. Ozzy was already sitting in a chair, holding a notebook in his hand. He looked weak, but his eyes were wide awake, like a man chasing a final vision. "I've been thinking," Ozzy started, "what if this wasn't the end for everyone?" Alex sat down slowly, not sure where this was going. "You've still got it in you," Ozzy continued. "I watched you last night. I saw it in your eyes. You don't want to let it go. Neither do I." Ozzy opened the notebook. A list of names. Musicians. Legends. Some alive. Some gone. At the top of the list, two names were underlined in red. Tony Iommi. Alex Van Halen. And next to them, just one word. Reunion? Alex looked up, stunned. "You're talking about, what, exactly?" Ozzy grinned. "Something different. Not Sabbath. Not Van Halen. But something real. Something honest. A final wave goodbye, with heart." Alex shook his head slowly, but not in refusal. In disbelief. Could this be the start of something? He had told himself he'd never return to the stage without Eddie. But maybe he could carry Eddie with him. Just like Sabbath carried their pain. Ozzy looked Alex dead in the eye. "We built this thing, man. Let's not let the world forget where it came from." Tony Iommi reads the letter. Alex Van Halen stood outside Tony Iommi's Birmingham home, letter in hand. It was raining lightly. The sky was gray, but not in a gloomy way. It felt calm, like the universe was holding its breath. Tony opened the door himself. "Back again, Alex," he said, smiling faintly. Alex held up the envelope. "I think this belongs to you." Inside, in the warmth of Tony's den, surrounded by gold records and quiet memories, Alex handed over the letter Eddie had written years ago. Tony took it slowly, recognizing the handwriting immediately. He didn't say a word as he opened it. The room fell silent. As Tony read, his fingers tightened slightly on the paper. His eyes scanned the words carefully, pausing at the final lines. "If you guys ever play one last show, know I'll be there, even if you don't see me." Tony looked up. His voice cracked. "I didn't know he felt this way." Alex leaned forward. "He never stopped admiring you. None of us did." Tony folded the letter, placed it on the table beside an old photograph of Sabbath from 1971, and let out a long breath. "I was ready to hang it up after that show," Tony said quietly. "But now..." He trailed off, lost in thought. Alex didn't push. He just let the silence work. After a long pause, Tony said something that surprised even him. Maybe we owe him one more song. The silence before the storm. News hadn't broken yet. No media leaks. No press releases. But something was happening behind the scenes. Alex, Tony, and Ozzy had started meeting in private, just talking, nothing official. Not about albums. Not about tours. Just music. And for the first time in years, Alex found himself sitting at a drum kit again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. It was strange, at first. Without Eddie, the rhythm felt incomplete. But then, slowly, he began to find it again. It wasn't the old Van Halen groove. It was something new. Heavier. Slower. But filled with feeling. And one day, Ozzy showed up at rehearsal with something unexpected. Lyrics. Brand new words. Raw. Honest. About pain, legacy, brothers, and ghosts that never quite leave. Ozzy said, "This isn't a band. It's a tribute. Not just to Eddie, but to all of them. To the ones we lost." Alex sat down behind the drums. Tony picked up his guitar. Ozzy stood at the mic. And for a moment, time stood still. The first notes that came out weren't perfect. But they were powerful. And they were real. The session lasted only 40 minutes. But by the end of it, there was no doubt. They had something. Something the world didn't expect. Something they weren't sure they could pull off. But now they had a name for it. Project Phoenix. A one-night concert. One time only. No albums. No tour. Just one final firestorm in honor of the fallen. And the world had no idea what was coming.